feel the breeze from the subway? Isn't it delicious?
Did Marilyn Monroe truly die from an overdose, or was her final breath shaped by forces far more powerful than she ever imagined? Her death at 36 shocked the world, but the strange inconsistencies that followed, missing timelines, shifting testimonies, and whispers of political danger, were even more unsettling. Hollywood tried to bury the truth, but the cracks remain open to this day. Stay until the end, because the most revealing detail lies in the last moment Marilyn ever lived. When dawn broke over Los Angeles on August 5, 1962, news spread that Marilyn Monroe had been found lifeless in her Brentwood home. She lay on her bed with one hand still wrapped around the telephone, as if she had reached for someone who never answered. The official verdict was suicide. Yet almost immediately, the story unraveled. Witnesses contradicted each other, the timeline shifted, and her bedroom appeared strangely arranged, as though staged for someone else to discover. Crowds flooded the street outside her home, stunned and heartbroken. But the only figure who moved with purpose was Joe DiMaggio. Without hesitation, he took control of her funeral and banned Hollywood from attending, as if he knew better than anyone how deeply the industry had wounded her. Then, quietly and without seeking sympathy, he sent red roses to her grave 3 times a week for 20 years. Before his death, he whispered, "I'm finally going to see Marilyn," leaving behind one of the most enduring acts of devotion in American history. Yet the true reason the world still clings to Marilyn is not just the mystery of her death, but the tragedy of her life. She was luminous yet fragile, adored by millions, yet abandoned in the moments she needed love the most. Her beauty was unforgettable, but it was the sorrow behind it that made her eternal. Marilyn Monroe did not simply fade from this world, she transformed into a reminder that even the brightest legends can break quietly in the dark. Part 1. The question that never let America sleep. Hook, within 100 words. Did Marilyn Monroe truly die from an overdose, or was her final breath shaped by forces far more powerful than she ever imagined? Her death at 36 shocked the world, but the strange inconsistencies that followed, missing timelines, shifting testimonies, and whispers of political danger, were even more unsettling. Hollywood tried to bury the truth, but the cracks remain open to this day. Stay until the end, because the most revealing detail lies in the last moment Marilyn ever lived. When dawn broke over Los Angeles on August 5, 1962, news spread that Marilyn Monroe had been found lifeless in her Brentwood home. She lay on her bed with one hand still wrapped around the telephone, as if she had reached for someone who never answered. The official verdict was suicide, yet almost immediately the story unraveled. Witnesses contradicted each other, the timeline shifted, and her bedroom appeared strangely arranged, as though staged for someone else to discover. Crowds flooded the street outside her home, stunned and heartbroken, but the only figure who moved with purpose was Joe DiMaggio. Without hesitation, he took control of her funeral and banned Hollywood from attending, as if he knew better than anyone how deeply the industry had wounded her. Then, quietly and without seeking sympathy, he sent red roses to her grave 3 times a week for 20 years. Before his death, he whispered, "I'm finally going to see Marilyn," leaving behind one of the most enduring acts of devotion in American history. Yet the true reason the world still clings to Marilyn is not just the mystery of her death, but the tragedy of her life. She was luminous, yet fragile, adored by millions, yet abandoned in the moments she needed love the most. Her beauty was unforgettable, but it was the sorrow behind it that made her eternal. Marilyn Monroe did not simply fade from this world, she transformed into a reminder that even the brightest legends can break quietly in the dark. Long before Marilyn Monroe belonged to Hollywood, she belonged to no one. She came into the world on June 1, 1926, with the unassuming name Norma Jeane Mortensen and the misfortune of being born into chaos. Her mother, Gladys, was a film cutter in Hollywood, but plagued by a fragile mind that cracked under the weight of heartbreak and trauma. Her father was a ghost, a man whose name Marilyn would chase for the rest of her life without ever catching. This absence stamped her from birth with a word that followed her like a curse: illegitimate. In the conservative culture of the 1,920 seconds, that label was not just a description but a condemnation, and Norma Jeane felt it before she could even speak. Gladys loved her daughter in bursts of warmth and clarity, but her mind was a storm that never fully calmed. Financial pressures, emotional instability, and unresolved grief pushed her to place Norma Jeane in foster care. Thus began the pattern that would define Marilyn's childhood, being given away, reclaimed, and then lost again. She lived with the Bolander family first, where strict religious discipline replaced affection. Later, she bounced between relatives, orphanages, and foster homes like a suitcase no one wanted to keep. She moved through the world quietly, afraid to be too much of a burden, afraid to ask for anything, afraid that one wrong word would send her back to the cold walls of the orphanage. But the deepest wound came when she was 10. A man from a foster household crept into her room and violated the child who had already learned too much about fear. She tried to tell someone, but her trembling voice was dismissed, and the blame somehow shifted onto her. The incident silenced her for years. She developed a stutter, withdrew from her peers, and learned that men could be both fascinated by and dangerous to her body. She never recovered from that betrayal. She simply carried it forward into adulthood, where it would shape every relationship she touched. When she was 16, the foster family caring for her announced they were moving out of state. That meant one thing: Norma Jeane would be forced back into the orphanage. The thought of returning to that institution, of reliving the cold mornings and lonely nights, terrified her more than anything. So she accepted the only escape offered to her. She married her neighbor, James Doherty, a quiet young man who seemed safe enough, but whom she did not love. Their wedding was not a celebration of romance, but a survival strategy. She became a wife not because she wanted to build a life with him, but because she wanted to avoid another life entirely. Yet even in this confined world, fate reached out its hand. While James was serving in the Marine Corps, Norma Jeane worked in a wartime factory where greased machines roared and metal clattered beneath her feet. One afternoon, an army photographer noticed her luminous face among the workers and lifted his camera. The shutter clicked, and in that instant, something within her stirred. For the first time, someone saw her not as a burden or a problem to be solved, but as a presence, a light, a possibility. She held that thought close even after her husband returned from the war and expected her to resume the life of a housewife. But she knew she was not meant to disappear into domestic obscurity. The world had finally seen her, and she was ready to be seen again. When Norma Jeane stepped into the world of modeling, she did so with the hunger of someone who had nothing to lose. She dyed her hair a shimmering platinum blonde, brightened her skin with creams, corrected her teeth, reshaped her chin and nose, and learned the alchemy of posing for the camera. She understood early that Hollywood was not a place of fairness, but of reinvention. If she wanted to escape the life that had suffocated her, she needed to transform completely. And she did. With each photograph, she carved out a new identity. With each small role in films, she built another fragile layer of the persona that would one day be called Marilyn Monroe. But Hollywood in the late 1940 seconds was a paradise built on exploitation. Young women like her were surrounded by powerful men who viewed them as commodities to be consumed rather than artists to be nurtured. Marilyn became entangled in an affair with Charlie Chaplin Jr., only to discover he had a fierce rivalry with his own brother, whom Marilyn had also been involved with. Humiliation became her constant shadow. Then came the studio executives who called her into private meetings under the guise of discussing contracts. One of them, a man nearly 70, is believed to have signed her only on the condition that she be romantically available to him. Another demanded favors in exchange for renewing her contract at Columbia Pictures. When she refused, the studio cut her loose within months. Despite these violations, Marilyn pushed forward with relentless determination. She posed for nude photographs when she had no money to pay rent, not realizing those images would one day resurface as weapons used against her. She embraced roles that others would have rejected, believing any opportunity was better than being invisible. She endured snide comments from men who saw her as nothing more than a calendar girl. But Marilyn was too focused on survival to crumble under cruelty. She knew that to stand out in Hollywood meant embracing a truth that frightened most women. She had to become unforgettable. Her breakthrough came quietly but powerfully. In 1950, she was cast in All About Eve. Her role was small, but her presence was impossible to ignore. Audiences were drawn to her like moths to flame, sensing both vulnerability and seduction in every movement she made. What the world didn't know was that behind the scenes, she was fighting a different battle. Marilyn was terrified of failure. Her anxiety knotted her stomach until she forgot her lines. She stayed awake at night rehearsing until dawn. She redid scenes dozens of times, seeking a perfection that eluded her, but instead of being celebrated for her dedication, she was labeled difficult. Hollywood refused to see her fear as anything more than vanity. She did not realize it yet, but the very traits the studios criticized would become the foundation of her legend. In Marilyn, the world found someone who shined so brightly that it blinded people to her cracks, and someone who cracked so deeply that people mistook the pieces for glitter. Success arrived suddenly but not gently. In 1953, Marilyn starred in a trio of films that transformed her from a rising actress into an undeniable force. She became the archetype of Hollywood glamour, the woman whose walk could silence a room, whose voice could melt through microphones, and whose photographs fueled the imagination of an entire generation. But fame did not lift her into the safety she dreamed of. Instead, it magnified the pain she had always carried. Marilyn suffered from endometriosis, a condition that brought unbearable physical agony. In public, she glowed. In private, she curled into herself, trembling from the torment in her abdomen. Before one surgery, she taped a note to her stomach begging doctors not to remove her ovaries. It was not vanity, it was hope, the simple, aching hope to be a mother, a dream repeatedly torn from her by fate. Her marriages faltered, her friendships strained, and the studios that depended on her beauty refused to acknowledge her suffering. Hollywood saw her blonde hair and curves, but ignored the books she devoured and the plays she studied. Marilyn read philosophy, wrote poetry, and questioned everything around her. Yet the world insisted she was a dumb blonde, a caricature she despised but could never fully escape. The harder she fought to be taken seriously, the more the industry tightened its grip around the persona it had sculpted for her. On screen, she sparkled, but behind the scenes, she unraveled. She grew dependent on pills to sleep, to wake, to calm her racing thoughts, to silence the voices of anxiety that echoed from her chaotic childhood. The pressure to be perfect in every scene pushed her beyond exhaustion. Directors grew frustrated. Co-stars whispered rumors. Marilyn retreated deeper into the only place she felt safe, her own imagination, where she could rewrite the life that had always been written for her by others. Yet even as she spiraled, the world fell ever more in love with her. There was something in her eyes that betrayed her heartbreak, something in her smile that revealed how much effort it took to lift the corners of her lips. People saw her suffering even when she hid it, and they adored her because of it, not despite it. Marilyn Monroe did not shine because she was flawless. She shined because her flaws glimmered like stars through the cracks of her soul. Marilyn's marriage to Joe DiMaggio was the kind of union Hollywood devoured with ravenous fascination. He was America's baseball hero, stoic and strong. She was the world's most coveted woman, luminous and free. Their chemistry was explosive, but their differences were fatal. DiMaggio loved Marilyn, but he could not understand her. He wanted a wife who stayed home, who belonged only to him, who hid her beauty from other men. Marilyn could not be contained. She sought acting classes, social events, new scripts, and new challenges. She wanted to grow. He wanted her still. The breaking point came quietly but violently. During the filming of The 7-Year Itch, her white dress billowed above a subway grate, and the crowd erupted in cheers. It became one of the most iconic images in film history, but for DiMaggio, it was a public humiliation. His jealousy hardened into rage. They fought viciously that night, and Marilyn appeared the next morning with bruises that she tried desperately to conceal. She filed for divorce 9 months later, tears streaming down her face as the cameras captured the shattering of a marriage that had promised her peace. But heartbreak did not relent. Marilyn married playwright Arthur Miller in 1956, believing he would understand her mind, not just her body. For a brief moment, she felt she had discovered the intellectual sanctuary she always longed for. But Miller, too, grew frustrated with her emotional fragility. When she discovered a notebook in which he wrote that she embarrassed him, Marilyn collapsed into devastation. It was a deeper wound than any critic's words because it came from the man she trusted most. Their marriage deteriorated further as they endured a series of pregnancies that ended in tragedy. Each loss carved another hollow in her heart. Marilyn searched for connection elsewhere, falling into affairs that offered temporary comfort but long-term chaos. She became involved with men who promised salvation but delivered confusion. One co-star fathered a pregnancy that ended in yet another heartbreak. She confessed to friends that she felt cursed, as though the universe had decided she was meant to be adored but never loved. The more she tried to grip onto affection, the more it slipped through her trembling fingers. As Marilyn drifted deeper into despair, she crossed paths with the most powerful men in America. Her connection to President John F. Kennedy began as a spark of fascination and grew into an affair fraught with danger. She longed for tenderness. He sought escape. Their moments together were electric but impossible. The country could never accept a president entangled with a woman whose image was both celebrated and condemned. Marilyn believed he might leave his wife, a belief that Jackie Kennedy dismissed with a single cutting remark. It was a moment that revealed the limits of Marilyn's dreams. Then came Robert Kennedy, softer in demeanor, more attentive, more compassionate. Marilyn turned to him for comfort, but the relationship only entwined her deeper in a web she could not navigate. Powerful men admired her, used her, adored her, then abandoned her when she needed stability the most. She became a liability, a woman carrying secrets no one wanted her to speak aloud. Her mental health collapsed. Insomnia ravaged her, pills blurred her days and erased her nights. On the set of Something's Got to Give, she was late, absent, or trembling with exhaustion. Fox fired her in humiliation, only to beg her to return when they realized they needed her more than she needed them. But by then, Marilyn was too far gone. The voices within her were louder than the applause outside. Her psychiatrist eventually committed her without warning. She thought she was entering a place of healing, but instead, she was locked in a padded room, treated like a criminal rather than a patient. Marilyn screamed her innocence into walls that refused to answer. It was Joe DiMaggio, the man she could not love properly, but who never stopped loving her, who came to rescue her once more. When she stepped into the daylight again, her spirit had thinned into something translucent. Marilyn spent her final months clinging to fragments of hope. She renovated her home. She talked about future projects. She considered reconciling with DiMaggio. But beneath these fragile plans, darkness continued to spread. On August 4th, she made several phone calls, sounding disoriented yet desperate to hold on to something real. When the world found her the next morning, lying still with the telephone in her hand, it was clear she had tried to reach someone in her last breath, but no one reached back. The official cause was listed as an overdose, but the inconsistencies sparked theories that still burn decades later. Some believe she knew too much about the Kennedys. Others suspect political forces silenced her, and some say the truth was simpler and sadder. She died of loneliness. A loneliness so vast that it swallowed even her will to survive. Joe DiMaggio arranged her funeral with the tenderness of a man carrying his own heart in pieces. He barred the Hollywood elite, the very people who had fed on her brilliance until she dimmed. Then he visited her grave week after week, year after year, leaving roses for the woman he could not save. Marilyn Monroe did not vanish in 1962. She became eternal. Her face adorns walls, magazines, dreams, and memories. Her fragility whispers through generations. Her sorrow lingers in the curves of her smile. She remains the paradox the world cannot resolve, a woman who shined so brightly that it blinded us to the shadows consuming her. And perhaps that is why we never forget her. Because Marilyn was not just a star, she was the reminder that the human heart can break in the most beautiful ways.